Good. I'm so glad that everyone could make it. And we have a nice small group, but intimate group in the room here with us. And we just saw a little video about Brother Ken Rawson, who, of course, produced the movie that many of us use when we want to let our light shine about Israel. And um, Jonathan Feldstein, as I mentioned, met Brother Ken via email and phone in the mid 2000s, soon after Jonathan made Aliyah to Israel. And we only met Jonathan a month ago through Abe Truitt, who introduced us to him. And how we missed Jonathan in all the years that we've been going to Israel, I have no idea. Because we've been involved with many, many Jewish Christian organizations in the last 15 years since we've been active in that mission in our life. And as you can see here, this is the Jewish um, version of Israel Appointment with Destiny. But after several years of just having the Jewish version of this video, Brother Ken was getting um, requests from churches to come and present Israel fulfilling Bible prophecy in churches. And so he made a different introduction to the movie and called it Israel Fulfilling Bible Prophecy. And that became probably even more popular than Israel Appointment with Destiny because there was many more millions of uh, Christians interested in Bible prophecy than even the Jews. Um, Another thing that Brother Ken did for probably 20 years was put ads in the Jerusalem Post and other places in Israel's media, primarily, I believe, promoting the booklet Embrace Your Jewish Heritage, which is a classic. If you've never read it, read it because it's absolutely incredible. And if you know any Jewish friend that their faith is faltering or they have little faith, give that booklet to them. Um, I just want, and I have already apologized to Jonathan because I'm going to give a little longer introduction than I would normally do. But Jonathan does not have a PowerPoint tonight. He's what he calls himself low tech. So I thought I would just give a little bit of what I gave just a few weeks ago at a convention in South Africa, believe it or not. And I presented the thought, and this was way before, of course, what happened last week in Syria, but it kind of follows in what I believe is happening in Israel. But we know we have this prophetic word that should get brighter and brighter until that day dawns and until Christ's presence, as we know it, and Bible students, Jonathan, believe Christ has been present since 1874 in an invisible manner. And not all Bible students, but probably the majority. Um, and that we should not be in darkness, that this day of the Lord should overtake us as a thief in the night, which we believe is secretly Christ's presence has taken the world by surprise, and will take the world by surprise. So, what hit me on the day that Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at the UN and spoke what I consider to be truth, um, this scripture hit me right between the eyes. That darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness, or some translation, gross darkness, covers the peoples. But the Lord will arise on you, upon you. It's talking about natural Israel. It's tough to spiritualize this chapter, brethren. It's really talking about Israel and the glory of God that will appear to Israel. Now, if you study Isaiah 60, it is the only chapter, this is the only negative verse in the entire long chapter. The rest of the verses are talking about um, the nations coming into relationship with Israel. And it's an absolutely incredible because it's talking about, I believe, the millions of Christian Zionists that are taking the Jewish people by storm in great support and in great comfort. And so I would better translate this verse darkness covers the land, and I believe it's talking about the land of Israel. And thick darkness, I believe that word should be more properly, and it is in many places, translated nations. This is talking about the darkness of October 7. It's talking about the darkness of the attacks upon Israel, the thousands and thousands of rocket attacks, the attack by Iran, in which you look at the nation of Israel, it was covered with red alerts. And it's talking about the thick darkness of ignorance that and anti-Semitism that covers the nations. That's what I believe these verses are talking about. Now, very quickly, as I was preparing for this came up on my news feed tomorrow. My good friend Rabbi Paul-Joyce is sponsoring a seminar, a little podcast called "Why Do Christians Support Israel?" It's tomorrow, noontime at Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Anybody that wants that link that is not in touch with Israel 365, let me know. But I just want to say one thing, and I said this to Jonathan on the way here from the airport. In October 2022, when Joyce and I was in Israel for the second time in 2022, still COVID was around, and we went to Israel twice that year to prepare for 2 tours for 2023. And our last stop was with our good friend Rabbi Paul-Joyce and his new CEO, Rabbi Frolinger. And we sat down with them and we went through the last chapter of Daniel with them and what we consider the dual application of the days of Daniel. And we went through that and we said to them very plainly, next year, 2023, something significant is going to happen in Israel based on the prophecy of Daniel 12 as it applies to Daniel's people, the Jewish people. And almost exactly 1 year later, October 7, 2023 happened. And we're not a prophet where we study the prophecies, but if you study the last verse of Daniel 11 and almost the last verse of Daniel 12 and study what's in between, you'll see that this prophecy is coming true in Israel. How? It's all these numbers that are so very plain to a lot of Bible students, from 539 to 1874, and the dual application from 688 to 2023. So where are we? Are we at the point of Elijah coming out of the cave and God saying to him the second time, "What are you doing here, Elijah? I have more work for you. Should you go back to the desert of Damascus, which is where God sent Elijah?" It's so interesting to see where we are today, brethren. This to me is quite revealing. It would be what I would call the spiritual and the natural application of the days of Daniel, the 1260, 1290, and 1,335 days. So where's Joyce and I? Well, next year, Lord willing, we'll be in Israel from March 8 to 26. We are going to put out tomorrow an offering for any brethren that would like to come with us. We're not just going to call this a Bible Student Israel tour. We're going to call it a mission and a tour. Now, this tour on your left was from 2023 was canceled. All those brethren, Rita, Brenda, Jan, Paul, Alicia, Mark, we hope you're going to come with us next year. And we'll put together a nice tour. We're going to offer it from the middle of this month until the middle of January, see how many brethren are interested, and we'll take good care of you. And if we get 10, probably 10 brethren altogether, we will have a tour next March. And Jonathan's going to tell you, do not be afraid to go to Israel. And support Israel even during this time. What's next? I believe full sovereignty over the land is next. I believe the Abraham Accords are going to take off, and especially if Syria comes on board. The digital electronic warfare systems are just going to be a game changer. When those systems replace the iron or adjunct the iron.
Why do you call it iron beam?
Well, that's the new. That's the new one.
That's replacing it.
Replace the Iron Dome. Yeah, it's called the Iron Beam. So anyway, brethren, finally, remember this scripture. Behold the fig tree, which there's two Greek words that are used in the Gospels. One means to learn from. The other means to stare at, to look intensely at. The fig tree and all the trees. That's interesting to think about, but we won't get into that. Know for yourself that summer is nigh. When you see these things happening, recognize the kingdom of God is near, and that this generation, I think that's Glenda's
Yes, I believe that.
Glenda's generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So I want to present to you my now good friend, as of a month, Jonathan Feldstein. I think we're going to be long friends, Jonathan. We've had some incredible conversations already. Jonathan has put together an incredible, stunning book. I don't know how he did it. It must have come together right before interactions in the United States with other Christians. This is our good friend Tommy Waller and Zach Waller, who we've met as well. So Jonathan's going to talk about Israel the Miracle, and he's going to talk about Genesis 1, 2, 3 foundation, which really means Genesis 12:3. And their mission is to build bridges between Jews and Christians, and to help. I just want to read one thing that I wrote recently. That in the wake of October 7th and the world exhibiting waves of anti-Semitism, it's become clear that Israel's most reliable friends are the millions of Christians who support Israel due to their faith in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Bible students, 1876, we said Israel will become a nation again. We said that absolutely in 1876. So we are early Christian Zionists. Around 1948 is when this new generation coincided of Christians that started to be enthusiastic as Christian Zionists, and especially at the same time you moved to Israel, Jonathan. That's when the movement really got off the ground with Christians United for Israel. Anyway, I present to you Jonathan Feldstein, and we're very glad Jonathan made a stop here. I'm going to pin this, I hope. I'm probably not doing this right either, but all right, you come around this way, Jonathan. All right.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
It's a pleasure to be here in person with all of you, and it's a pleasure to be here virtually with all of you. I want to first thank Paul and Joyce for hosting me here in their home personally. Special happy birthday to Joyce. It's nice to be here. All right.
No big deal.
And I also want to thank all of you. Well, actually, before I do that, Paul mentioned our mutual good friend, Abe Truitt, who graciously made the introduction, and I think correctly so, because as you said, Paul, we've only spoken a few times. We've known each other for a relatively short period, but it's already very what I like to refer to as a new old friendship, and I'm blessed by that. And I want to thank all of you who are here virtually. Um, I've learned a lot more in the last month or so about Bible students than I've known in a very long time. And I had no idea, truly, how many years ago was it, Paul? Not quite 20, 15 years ago or so, when I was first in touch with Pastor Rawson. There are many things in my life that I remember vividly as being pivotal, but I didn't realize that they were necessarily pivotal at that time. And I can see myself sitting in my living room on our burgundy leather couch, looking at probably the Jerusalem Post, but at the time we were subscribing to Jerusalem Post and Haaretz daily. And I remember seeing these full page ads. And you'll understand this. I know you understand this, that Jews still today, then, met with curiosity at best and suspicion often as to why would there be a pastor putting an ad in the Jerusalem Post inviting us to get a book about our own about fulfilling our destiny. But it piqued my interest, and I'm going to share with you a couple of things today to give you the context of why it was more than just me sitting on the couch, and why I did reach out to Pastor Rawson. And now that I know you, I'm particularly sad that I actually never got the opportunity to meet him. We were both from New Jersey originally. It was easy to stop over at Newark Airport and visit him on the way in or out. And my brother's still in New Jersey. I still vote and pay taxes in New Jersey. And but sadly, I never had the privilege of meeting him. But I do remember his emails and his responsiveness and an occasional phone call, once or twice maybe, just being gracious and warm. And you reflect that. And that's a tremendous blessing. So I want to thank you for that. This is not to be taken for granted at all. I want to give a little bit of context, who I am and why I'm here, other than the fact that I flew into O'Hare today and Paul picked me up. As I mentioned, I grew up in New Jersey. My father, I refer to him as an original Palestinian. He was born in 1937 in Haifa, when he and his parents were three of about 600,000 Jews in the land. And his parents fled Poland. Most of my grandfather's siblings survived. Most of my grandmother's siblings did not survive. All of their parents were murdered. Interestingly, my father never grew up with grandparents. He didn't know his grandparents. They were alive when he was born, but he never knew them. And one of the great comforts I have in my life, albeit that he died very young, was that he became, thanks to me and my wife, he became a grandparent. And I got to see him fulfill that being a grandparent and become a completed, not that he wasn't, but becoming a grandparent completes you. Um, I got to see that in him, but also he had no personal examples of what a loving grandparent should be. So he just jumped into it and really excelled for the 3 years that he lived after my oldest daughter was born. I did not grow up as an Orthodox Jew. I realized as a child, as a teenager, when I first went to Israel on a family trip, my father's second trip back after he left in the 1950s, that if I didn't give my children, remember I'm a teenager, I probably had never dated anybody yet. I surely was not thinking about being married, much less having a family. But I realized if I didn't give my children more than I got, that I would be watering down the tradition. That I wouldn't be passing it along. I wouldn't be building it up. And I actually, here I am preaching to the choir. I don't need to tell you how bad that is, how horrific that is. So I grew in my path of growth and learning. Um, I went to Emory University. I don't know if anyone here is following from Georgia, but spent several years living in Atlanta. The significance of that is that, and I think we mentioned this, Paul. We talked about this maybe the other day. I was very involved as a late teenager, early 20s in the movement to rescue Jews from the Soviet Union. And if you have nothing better to do later tonight, you can Google Jonathan Feldstein, ABC News Person of the Week, and you'll see me from 1988 when Ted Koppel anchored that Friday night program. It was about me helping to rescue one particular family. I won't tell the whole story, but the significance of that was I went to Emory University, writing my college entry application, basically telling Emory that I was going to co-opt them to become part of my plan to free Jews from the Soviet Union, and I did. And that was the story that ABC News told in 1988, how I helped get the young woman from the family that I had adopted accepted to Emory in 1985, 6, I don't remember what year, after my first trip to the Soviet Union. And I was innately involved in pro-Israel activities. So I was recruited right after graduation to work as the information officer at the Israeli consulate in Atlanta. This is the late 1980s. So for those of you who have the historic memory, you'll remember that the late 1980s, 87, 88 into 89, we were in the midst of what was called then the Intifada. It was the first. Today we call it the first Intifada because we've had a second, and who knows what if there'll be a third. But this is where we are. And what was fascinating about that, I was not yet an Israeli citizen, even though my father was born there. So I was one of two Americans working in the consulate. I would do a great deal of the writing for the two diplomats, one of whom was Israel's first Israeli Arab to head a diplomatic mission overseas, Mohammed Masarwa, lovely man, then a secular Muslim Arab lawyer. He became a judge and mayor of the Wadi Ara region. Delightful man. And I used to write, but I used to write as a Jewish man in my 20s from New Jersey. I didn't know how to write as an Israeli Arab, so I had to learn a lot about that. And I always joke that when the diplomats were either too busy or too lazy, they would send me to Alabama or Tennessee or South Carolina or South Georgia, and I would speak on behalf of the state of Israel in a wide variety of groups. Why am I telling you this? Because sometime in 1988 or 89, it's one of those pivotal moments, but I don't know the date. I don't even know the season. I was picked up by a very tall, thin black man named Bill Cherry. I always say his name in hope that someone will know. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe someone knows one of his children or grandchildren, and I can relate to them. What an angel, literally, he was in my life. He picked me up at my apartment on Buford Highway and drove me to a place called Cleveland, Tennessee. I had never heard of Cleveland, Tennessee, I was born in the 1960s. I love classic rock. I've heard of Cleveland, Ohio, because of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but never Cleveland, Tennessee. And I surely didn't know that in this town called Cleveland, Tennessee, there was a denomination of Christianity called the Church of God that was headquartered there. And it was the first time that I walked into a church. That's pivotal. And that's what brings me here today. And I think I said this to you earlier, Paul. If you could put a USB port right here in my head, or here, or here, you could still download the images that I walked into that night. Looking through 22, 23, 24-year-old Jewish eyes coming from America, from New Jersey, you could still download the door that I walked in from the gravel parking lot, the stage that was on my right, where Christians were wearing blue and white costumes, singing Hebrew songs, and dancing Israeli folk dances. What you can't imagine, you can guess, is how blown away I was and how confused I was, because I simply had no idea why Christians would care, pray for, support, celebrate Israel and the Jewish people. But what I realized there is if there were a physical tap on the shoulder with God calling me to be a bridge between Jews and Christians, it's such an indelible tap that I would still have the bruise on my shoulder today. And I knew I needed to understand it, and I knew I needed to do something about it, but I didn't know what. And it makes sense that I really didn't grasp it until I lived in Israel, which is this summer was our 20th anniversary. But once I did, once I moved to Israel, I was doing projects working for other organizations that organically Christians started flocking to. I didn't understand why, but I understood that this was part of what I needed to do to begin to embrace that. Long story short, I was working for various organizations that were very happy for me to raise funds from Christians. I refer to it in 2017. I do a lot of writing, most of it on Christian websites, which is really fun. But this one article was the summer of 2017. I had had enough. I had had enough with seeing fellow Jews and Israelis doing what I call the objectification of Christians as a faith-based ATM. What's an ATM? You slip in a card, you punch in a 4-digit code, you take out however much cash you want, and you don't even say thank you. And that's what I was seeing. And I wrote an article, not in a Christian site, but in a Jewish website, calling out that proclivity because it bothered me. It bothered me that previous to that, I had had bosses who really only cared about how much money I raised, didn't care about the integrity of doing so, certainly didn't care about relations. They cared about a transaction. And at this point, I was already past 50. There are a lot of other reasons 50-year-old men don't sleep at night. We'll talk a little bit about the war later. And by the way, I do want to offer all of you, of course, here present physically and virtually. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. And I say this all the time, questions on anything I'm discussing and questions on anything that I have not yet broached, but you want to know about. I decided that at that point, I needed to start, as Paul mentioned, the Genesis 1, 2, 3 foundation. Because, and why 1, 2, 3? Because it's easier to say 1, 2, 3 than to punctuate 12:3 in a website and then try to articulate that on a radio show without the graphic underneath. And for some of us who are old enough to remember the Jackson 5, they had a really fun song, ABC easy as 1, 2, 3. I wanted to make blessing Israel as easy as 1, 2, 3. But I wanted to do so with integrity. I wanted to build relations. And when I talk about building bridges and making relationships, and I'll mention more about it if I remember, it also, from my perspective, must be a two-way street. It's lovely and it's super meaningful for me to be here with you tonight, physically and virtually. But it also has to reflect, I think, what you, as Bible students, embody, which is a relationship with the Jewish people, and to do so in a way that's not only not threatening but loving and embracing, and so terribly sincere. And I love that. It brings me home in many, many different ways. So Genesis 1, 2, 3 Foundation was started so we could do things like that. I do need to correct one thing, Paul. On the invitation that you had sent, you mentioned the first 2/3 of the verse, Genesis 12:3. Everyone knows it. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. But what's the conclusion of the verse?
In you all the
Families of the earth will be blessed.
In you, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And it's important that the word is families. For you, for Gentiles, for Christians, the first third is an imperative. The second third you don't want to touch. And the third is an imperative to me, to be a blessing to the families of the world. And that's so important also in what we do as the Genesis 1, 2, 3 Foundation. I'll just give really, really quick examples, but I always expose my Jewish friends, and I've lost Jewish friends over relationships like this. But I always expose my Jewish friends to this, to you, to the phenomena of Christian Zionism. But we also have a responsibility to be a blessing. You remember, I think it was 22, there was what they called in America then supply chain issues, and people couldn't buy baby formula. Remember that? Mm-hmm. I grew up in America. We were talking about our mutual recollections of what we were doing during the gas crisis in the 1970s. I was selling cans of Coke on the gas lines in New Jersey, and you were reading books while you were filling up your tank. I wasn't old enough yet to drive, but I was very entrepreneurial. But I lost my train of thought. Why was I telling you this?
Blessing all the nations.
Thank you. America is the greatest land of prosperity. It's I know that my grandparents in the Second World War dealt with shortages and rationing, but I didn't grow up with that. It's hard to imagine any rationing or any shortages of anything here in the United States. And I'm a parent and I'm a grandparent. And I thought, oh my goodness, somewhere in America, there's a parent or a grandparent whose baby can't eat because they live on formula and they're too young to be able to eat, drink whole milk or eat solid food. So on my first trip back to America that time, I flew with one of my daughters, and because I fly United and I have status, United gives me the privilege. Well, you help me carry my bags in, Paul. I carry 3 heavy bags. I brought 200 pounds of baby formula from Israel that I gave away to 2 churches in the Dallas area, which was my first stop. Funny story, when I landed here in Chicago today, I remembered this is my port of entry. Some of the cans of formula had cracked, and I was afraid they were going to say, "What's that white substance that's leaking out of your suitcase, Mr. Feldstein?" They didn't, thank God. And I brought the baby formula, and I made a mess on the driveway of my friend Ann Stacy in the Dallas area. And she observed that no one had ever. She hosts friends from Israel all the time, but she said no one ever brought us anything. And why is families of the world so important? Because I was bringing metal cans of baby formula printed with Hebrew, going to the kitchen counters and pantries of families in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That was cool. And I think I'm the only Orthodox Jew who ever initiated a fundraising campaign to bless Pakistani Christians who were being persecuted after the terrible biblical level flooding that took place in their country a few years ago. I've done other things, and the point is not for me to pat myself on the back or make you think that I'm so important. The point is that I'm approaching this whole relationship, Jews and Christians, uniquely, reciprocally. I want to just fast forward to a couple of other things that we do to give you a sense of the uniqueness. And the uniqueness is because I want to have this relationship. I want to build upon it, and I pray that we will. My first program when we started Genesis 1, 2, 3 is called Run for Zion. I went to the mayor of Jerusalem, whose name is Nir Barkat. He's now Minister of the Economy, economic minister. He's certainly a candidate to be Prime Minister in the country. He's an independently wealthy politician, entrepreneur, runner, and he started the Jerusalem Marathon. And I said to him, Mayor, if you're a Christian and you're a runner, Jerusalem is the most significant place. And you've built a lovely family picnic style environment here in Jerusalem that 30 and 40,000 people will come out to. But you're not bringing tourists in significant numbers, and you're surely not bringing Christian tourists to participate. Not in a full or half marathon, and not even in a 5 or 10K walk or run. And I shared with him my whole bless Israel and be blessed model. I said, my father was a chemist, so I look at things as a formula. Bless Israel and be blessed, right? That's a formula. So we provided a financial subsidy for this program that made the program as low as $79, which we're hopefully going to revive it again this year. We got killed by COVID. Took a couple of years to bounce back. Then we got killed by a war. Then I had this book that I put together. But that's one really amazing program. And then because of COVID, I went virtual. And I did what we're doing right here, right now. I learned about Zoom. And I hosted webinars called under the title Inspiration from Zion. And the webinars were successful and connected Christians all over the world with Israel in ways that are new and unique and meaningful. And because of that, we were talking about this earlier, because of that, I was invited to flip my webinar series into a podcast that's now more or less weekly. I haven't been keeping up while I'm traveling, where I'm the only Orthodox Jewish host of a weekly podcast from Israel on the Charisma Podcast Network. And you all know what that means, right? Charisma, 300 plus podcast hosts who are Christian, specific kind of Christian, and Jonathan Feldstein, the Orthodox Jew. We've hosted prayer events that have gone as long as 13 hours around the world, Jews and Christians together. The first one we did began in China, in Chinese, with people from underground churches praying in Chinese for Israel. And you know what that means. That's dangerous for them just to put their faces on the screen. And that was incredible. And that went 13 hours. And the most recent one, and you'll like this, was in May, on May 15th. May 15th is this day on the secular calendar on which Israel achieved independence. We declared our independence on the 14th, going into effect on the 15th. In case you don't know it, it's a very interesting piece of biblical history from 1948. May 15th was Shabbat. We don't conduct business on Shabbat. So the Declaration of Independence was made on Friday before Shabbat to go into effect on May 15th when the British ended their occupation. I use the word specifically. And that we did specifically on May 15th because our neighbors call it Nakba Day, the catastrophe. The catastrophe of Israel's existence. So we brought Jews and Christians together from all over the world to pray for the safe return of the hostages, for the success of the soldiers, and that God should change the hearts of our enemies. And I want to just say one thing which specifically brings us to here, and you, as Bible students specifically, I know you understand, at least conceptually, why it's uncomfortable for many Jews to be present in circumstances like this, certainly to pray with Christians together, and when Christians pray in the name of Jesus. I exist with that. I'm not only fine with it, I celebrate it. I think that that's how it should be, and I think we as Jews need to be a little bit less uncomfortable with all of that. But it was so important to bring Jews and Christians together, specifically in May. What were we then? 7, 8, 9 months into this war? I can't tell you how many of the Jewish participants thanked me profusely, either literally or figuratively, with tears in their eyes, because they had never been exposed to people like you. And that's what we needed and still need. And that leads me to this book. well, we have a physical copy, but it won't be visible so much because of the virtual we can put it here.
Oh, it might not be.
No, it's okay. Paul showed um, the cover. The book is called Israel the Miracle. It's available at israelthemiracle.com. We've already set up a special discount code, so when you check out, you use the discount coupon code Bible Students, and you'll receive, what do we set? 10%, 20%? 20% discount. So that's really quite nice. I would say it makes a great Christmas and Hanukkah present, and there's still time for that. I always joke, but I'm serious, that I'm never the smartest person in the room unless I'm the only person in the room. Why do I say that? I don't know. I could go back to my calendar and look at what day it precisely was. It was the last week of October of 2022. I was sitting in a hotel room in Dallas. We were talking about this earlier. I wish I could take credit for putting a blank piece of paper in front of me and sitting at the desk and a pen and starting to pray and contemplate what can we do as Genesis 1, 2, 3 to significantly mark Israel's 75th anniversary, which was then 6 months away. I didn't do that. I can't take the credit for trying to coalesce thoughts that would make something. This is a straight download from God. To put together a book of essays by 75 essays by Christian leaders from all over the world. Why 75? Because we were celebrating our 75th anniversary. What I've realized subsequently, and I think you know this, but it's interesting to point out, it was first of all, it was very complicated to put it together. And I was told by one of the authors, particularly who knows from publishing books, no way you're going to do this in time. But I didn't know. I never put a book together. So I just went forward with it. What's so interesting is that in 2022-23, I believe it was arguably easier to put together a book of 75 essays than it would have been 25 years earlier for a book of 50 essays by Christian leaders. Not that there weren't, but the phenomena of Christian Zionism 26 years ago, you mentioned Kufi. Kufi didn't exist. Not that John Hagee wasn't an ardent Zionist before Israel's 50th anniversary, but he wasn't on the radar. And many of the people in the book weren't on the radar. And it's fascinating to have put this together. The book is a beautiful representation. It's when you showed some of the interior now, Paul, it just gives me chills, because what a privilege that I've had in my life to be able to help compile something like this. I think we looked at Pat Robertson's essay, which we moved. His is the only one outside of alphabetical order because we printed the book just 2 months or so after he died. So we moved his essay to the front of the book in respect. And we've got every continent covered except Antarctica. We have people from their 20s to their 90s. We have multiple denominations. We have multiple ethnicities, articles that were written by people whose native languages are French and Spanish. I think Swahili. I don't remember. Yeah. From people who you've heard of. We were talking about the people you know in the book, and people you never have heard of, but whose hearts are expressed so beautifully. And we've created what's basically a published time capsule of Christian Zionism in Israel's 75th year. But as you noted, Paul, it came out before the war began. In fact, what was so interesting, and I use the words deliberately, the book was conceived in October. It was delivered to the printer in August. That was 9 months. And it came off the press a month later in September of 23, exactly 2 weeks before the war began. And that really messed up my plans to go on a book launch tour in October and November into December to sell books across America and other parts of the world. It's okay. God's timing works. Today, when you look at the book, when you read some of the essays, specifically the one by Colonel Richard Kemp, writing about an exceedingly great army, it's relevant in a different way, in a different dimension. And that's significant. And I want to just relate one more thing, and I'll speak very, very briefly about the war and one thing that we're doing. We've done many things in the war through our Israel emergency campaign, but I'd really like to give time for you to have questions. Um, I think we all know this as we mature. We look at everything in our lives differently year to year, right? We were in different circumstances, and the same things that we might have experienced in our lives a year earlier are different now, a year later, because of the circumstances being changed. I specifically am mindful of that when I read my Tanakh in the annual cycle that we read from Genesis through Deuteronomy and then the prophets. And I realized, I read that. I read about Noah last year. There's nothing new there. Oh, but there is. And I read about Jacob losing his son, who he thought was dead. The same week that my son went into Gaza a year ago and was out of touch. And surely Joseph went along the route to Gaza that my son was in a year ago. The war has changed how I look. You're Bible students, right? The war has changed how I look at my Bible. It hasn't shaken my faith. In fact, I'm fortunate that I look at it the way I do. We have had no shortage of wars that are documented biblically, right? The Amalekites and the Moabites and all the other ites, right, who attacked us. Sometimes they had to hold Moses' arms up in order to win, but ultimately we win. What's not written, and not really even in the rabbinic commentary, is Jonathan, the 59-year-old, went into battle with his 25-year-old son and his 33-year-old son-in-law. And one of them didn't come back. One of them had to have something amputated. The fear that they experienced, it wasn't just like, hey, God's on our side, we're going to win. No, come on, these were human beings. And I look at our scenario, our situation in Israel today, very much through that prism. Someone prayed over me recently, Psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I have no fear, right? And I stopped them. I said, no. I have fear. Quite a lot of fear, actually. And I want to get into the head. I'd love to have this conversation offline. Maybe you can help me understand it. What was David saying? I have no fear. Was that just a beautiful bumper sticker statement of faith? Or did he have no fear? But fear is not a bad thing. It just allows us to reaffirm our faith. So that's where I am today, 15 months, 16 months, however many months we're into this war with 100 hostages still in captivity, with goodness knows what's going to happen in Syria, but we have enough fronts already that we're on the fighting, and trust me, they're still fighting. There is no ceasefire. No end in sight, I don't believe. And I believe that all of us, certainly from my oldest two grandchildren, 4 and 6, all the way through me, and I can speak firsthand about all the trauma that we have experienced and are experiencing. We're not in post-trauma, we're in present trauma. It still exists. And in that context, the last thing that I'll say, it's very great that we're talking on December 11th, because 50 weeks ago, 50, I published an article in Times of Israel called "The Solution for Peace in Gaza is Jesus." Pretty radical for an Orthodox Jew, right? But you have to hear the backstory. You have to hear the backstory and then what came of it. And then I'm gonna talk about Then I want to open it up for questions, comments. I was writing in order to be edgy. I was writing because as much as I truly want peace, even though I don't know that peace from a North American perspective is really anything we're going to achieve in my lifetime, and I didn't think that before October 7th a year ago, and I surely don't think about that now, although I realize that God can make anything happen. And that's why we were praying in May to God to change the hearts of our enemies. If anyone can do it, he can do it. Right? That's our only hope, actually. So I was writing an article to undermine the nonsense of the two-state solution. I could, by the way, and I'm right of center. I live in what's pejoratively called a settlement. I could make the case for a two-state solution. I can make the case. But not since October 7th, not in my lifetime. And I wanted to call everyone's attention. This is a great initiative. So when I wrote that article, it was really to try to undermine the nonsense of giving Palestinian Arabs a state as if that A, would achieve anything by way of bringing peace, or B, wouldn't actually just be a reward for their terror. As you can imagine, many Christian friends saw my article and got real excited about it. And Jonathan, the Orthodox Jew, writing about the solution for peace in Gaza is Jesus. And that went over really well. And that led to some fabulous conversations with the imploring of me that this needed to go further. Because in point of fact, it's the truth. The only solution for peace in Gaza is Jesus. So I'm going to invite you all to go to solutionforpeaceingaza.com and look at the website that we've built up, where we are calling for 100,000 to 200,000 Christians to participate in what will be the largest missions trip ever to go and rebuild Gaza. To rebuild Gaza, showing the love of Jesus. To rebuild Gaza by people who have a relationship with the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, who understand that the Jewish people have the eternal covenant that God made with Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, and who never want it to see anyone rise up in Gaza again who will harm Israel and the Jewish people, and conversely or complementarily don't want to see Gazans continue to do things that are self-defeating, where they bring on suffering as they have themselves. And it's a generation-long missions trip. And one of the things that I'm so proud of in the website is that we put quotes of Matthew Miller from the State Department and John Kirby, who's, I forget his title, but a big spokesman in the Biden administration, and the spokesman of the IDF, and someone else in the IDF, and other political and religious and military leaders talking about, yes, we can defeat Hamas militarily, but we can't defeat their ideology so quickly. How do you defeat an ideology? With a better ideology. And what better ideology is there to change the heart of Gazans? 100,000 Christians to go in and rebuild. Physically rub shoulders with the Gazans to do that. And this is pretty radical. And I am praying that it will gain steam in the new administration and in the Israeli government and the IDF and in the United Nations and the European Union, and even among the Arab countries that are ultimately going to have to foot the bill with all of the rest of the Western world anyway to rebuild Gaza, along with Lebanon, along with Syria now. The bill's just getting bigger and bigger. But we know who's going to pay for it anyway. And I believe that logical, Paul, you were talking about building up the Abraham Accords. Why Abraham Accords? Why is it successful? Because they're being rational. They understand that peace is essential and that they have to coexist with us, and they'll thrive as a result. That's prophetic. That's a divine promise. And when they do that, and when we build up this peace, they can be prosperous. And my selfish goals are that I'd like to drive an hour and a half from my house to go to the beach in Gaza and get a kosher hamburger. My more substantial selfish goal is that I'd like that my 6-year-old grandson, when he goes into the army in 12, 13, 14 years, depending on if he does 1 or 2 years of a gap or yeshiva program before going into the army, that he won't encounter 18, 19, 20-year-old jihadi peers who still think that we have no legitimacy and it's their holy war obligation to annihilate us all. And until someone comes up with a better solution, that is the solution for peace in Gaza. I've spoken a lot about a variety of things, but there's a whole lot more, and I'm happy truly to take any questions on the things. I wanted to give you, this is our first time together. I really truly hope and pray that it won't be our last. And I wanted to give you a sense of who I am and what am I doing and where can a relationship like this go and why what you do, what you all represent is really so important. And it's my job to take that back to other Israelis and Jews around the world. But I'd love to hear your questions. I didn't speak so much about the war, the current events. If you want to talk about that, I'm happy to do that. If you want to talk about anything else that I've already mentioned or anything else that's on your mind, I'm here.
Brother Jeff, would you moderate any hands, recognize any hands that are there? And if you see any hands, you can recognize it as well. Let's put you on. Let's put you on something that's. There we go. I think.
Oh, that with the okay, so I can see people. Yeah, then we have to just.
Oh, I think I have to unpin you.
Oh, maybe.
No. Too bad Brett's not here.
Yeah.
I am. I took the spotlight off.
Oh, Brett, can you do anything to our screen, or do you have to be host?
I think you just have to adjust your screen, Paul. I think it's local for you.
Oh, maybe I have to push OK up
yeah.
there, and then that might do it.
Pin off of the right.
Where's the remove pin? Here we go. I got it.
Yeah, for a little.
Here we go.
All right. So Paul and Jan Daniels, nice to see you. And Joyce Kuzman's here. Wow, look at all these brethren. Let's see how many Wow, there are 81.
Wow, what a blessing.
81 online.
all.
Nice to see you all. I hope you were able to hear most of what Jonathan had to say. And so if you have any questions for Jonathan, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. And Linda Larson, go ahead.
But you're muted, Linda.
Paul, you're going to have to listen.
Oh, there
Could
we
you
go.
please repeat how we can get a copy of your book? And my question is, and this is almost embarrassing, but I would like advice on how to overcome my completely admitted prejudice against Arabs. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you for asking that. The easier question first. Israel the Miracle. You can go. First of all, always be in touch with me. Any of you, please, at Genesis123.co is our website, and there is a link there for the book. But there's also IsraelTheMiracle.com, and when you go to IsraelTheMiracle.com, you're going to use the discount coupon code Bible Students. So thank you for asking that. Look, about prejudice for Arabs, I was asked this in a presentation yesterday. First of all, we have to remember that God created all of us in his image. Okay, so even though they're out to kill me, and many of them are, maybe even most, I still try to remember to pray for them and minimally to pray that God will change their hearts. I will tell you this. This is a very profound conversation I had yesterday in Tampa. I'm definitely one who could advocate for all the reasons and even stretching limitations how to make peace with our Palestinian Arab neighbors. Having said that, since October 7th, because we know what happened, because we know of the not just the slaughter, but everything was so premeditated. And how did they know? And the book I gave you today also documents a lot of it. It's another good book to get. It's called A Day in October or One Day in October. Um, we know this. Maybe it's not publicized here in the U.S. well enough that Hamas infiltrated the communities which they ultimately in which they perpetrated the massacres with their own terrorists who were working in the communities, or they went to Omar and said, Omar, we know you work for the Jews. You need to come back next week and tell us who are the armed members of their rapid response team? Where do they keep their arms? Who has large dogs? And this happened. And if you haven't been, maybe on your trip, we'll take a visit down to the Gaza border. Um, you see the premeditatedness of it. And why do I mention all of that? It's hard for us. I live in a town called Efrat. Um, Out my living room window from the seventh floor of our apartment building, we are maybe half a mile to a Palestinian Arab village called Abdullah Ibrahim. And with my binoculars, I can see the mural of Yasser Arafat on the elementary school wall. We live in a building that was brand new. It was built 4 years ago. All of the workers who built the building were Palestinian Arabs. The carpenter who did our woodwork, the electrician, the contractor who came in to finish the sloppy work that the previous workers did, who said what these Arabs did such a bad job, they give us a bad reputation. Omar and Muhammad, and I'm trying to think of all of the other names, were all Arab workers. They could have all been mapping out us, knowing that I don't have a gun, but my neighbor Avi does. So go to Avi first because Jonathan can't defend himself. Could have been. So I answer this question in a very roundabout way. It's created a lot of distrust. There's a lot of protests that we don't want any Palestinian Arabs to come back and work in our community because we just don't know who can be trusted. And even and here's a tremendous philosophical question that we can all go home and be haunted about for the rest of the night. You're Omar. You're it doesn't matter what name. Omar. Omar is a good guy raising 4 kids, working hard as an electrician, as a plumber, as a whatever. And terrorists say, Omar, you go in and you provide intelligence or actually commit a crime against the Jews. And if you don't, we're going to kill your family.
Right.
So I try not to be any more anti-Arab than I am anyone else, and I try to evaluate people on an individual basis. I try to worry about more my shortcomings than I have more than enough, and how I can improve myself than worrying about casting a stone at someone else. But yeah, it's very hard. Pray for our enemies that they will change of heart.
We have Harry next, and then Paul and Jan. Go ahead, Harry.
Oh, hi. I'm okay. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I want. That's what I want. That's not what I want.
Is it Harry Wildblood?
Yes, very wildly. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate hearing about you. In 1985, that's when I first learned about Israel and who they are and really God's plan. my question is the end of Assad's regime. This happened just this week.
Yeah.
And but what do you see and how will this affect Israel? I don't know if you're a political commentator or what is your take on all this?
So at Emory University, I studied international studies and Middle Eastern studies, and I joke that I'm living currently in my own petri dish. The first thing that I was concerned about was my son called up. My youngest son is currently in his compulsory service. My older son was the one I referred to earlier, who was called up to Gaza on October 7th, and 3 months after he got married, and spent the next 4 months in and out of Gaza. More of his married time with his new wife, away from his new wife. That was very stressful for all of us. So the first thing, it was good news to me that he wasn't called up on two levels: personally, but also that meant that we're not talking or the kind of major ground incursion that we knew was going to be inevitable, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. That doesn't mean that won't happen. What a miracle to wake up on Sunday morning and discover that the Assad tyranny which has been for most of my life, his father and the one who is now in Moscow, have been banished, and that's a great thing potentially for Israel and for the Syrians. The Syrians have suffered. Well, it's funny that they accuse us of genocide, because it's actually Hafez Assad and Bashar Assad who have slaughtered more people in their own country than anything close in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm concerned. First of all, it's a good news piece because Iran. It's a third pin that Iran lost, and that's very significant in the past year or so. Now they can all regenerate. I refer to Iran as the octopus, and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the different militias in Iraq and Syria, of course, as the tentacles. And what do we know about an octopus? It can actually regrow its tentacles. So my hope is that we will see a proactive effort to end the Islamic regime in Iran, because if we can remove the head of the octopus, then we will find that the others may still have their jihadi ideology, but may not be able to affect it, or may just become practical. And then I would say the last piece. I don't fully understand who's in control in Syria, but I do know that there are competing militias. Turkey occupies a whole large chunk of northern Syria, and most of their fight is against the Kurds. The Kurds are fighting for their well-being and safety and protection, and the Sunnis hate the Shia, and the Shia hate the Sunni, and it should be a blues song or something like that, a country song, and yet we don't know who's going to continue to fight. We don't know if Russia and or Iran will continue to somehow find a way to prop up any of the militias, or maybe the Saudis will. And we don't know at what point, as they're fighting for hegemony in whatever's left of Syria, it's not impossible that one or more of them may turn their guns on Israel, because we're the common enemy that rallies the troops. So we can wake up tomorrow and find something very radically different, surely in a week, surely in a month. And I'm praying for a good outcome, but it's very hard to project what will be. But very good question.
Well, thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I appreciate
Not at all. Not at all.
I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Paul and Jan are next, and then Brother Brett and Tamara, and then
Richard.
Brother Richard will be third. Go ahead, Brother Paul and Jan.
Yeah, just we are curious about your thoughts on, with the new administration, U.S. coming in, what your perspective is about the Abrahamic Accords and how that might progress over the next 2, 3, 4 years, and what impact that'll have on Israel.
And what was the last part?
what impact it may have on Israel.
Well, okay. So if the second part first, if the Abraham Accords remain strong or get stronger, that's a positive for Israel, and I pray that that will be the case. It's unusual that this is the second time on December 25th I'll be flying home through Dubai, where I honestly, even with the fact that a Chabad rabbi was murdered in Abu Dhabi recently, I actually feel more safe walking around Dubai as an Orthodox Jew than in parts of the United States. That's a different, broader answer. But what look, I think immediately after October 7th took place, many people speculated that part of the reason it took place when it did was because we were getting awfully close to normalization with the Saudis. That probably was true, and it's probably been put on ice since. But I think the Saudis have every interest to continue to do so. And I think if we remember that President Trump in his first administration made it a priority on his first overseas visit to make his first stop in Saudi Arabia. And I think that I don't think he has to twist arms. I think he just has to rekindle the flame. And the Saudis probably will come along. The biggest challenge with the Saudis is that they're very stuck on an end to violence and somehow the creation of a Palestinian state. I hope maybe we can infect them with the idea of my solution for peace in Gaza instead of a nonsensical Palestinian state. I do think it's hard to imagine what other Arab countries may jump on board. Paul and I were talking earlier that Syria could, theoretically, maybe Lebanon could, but these are all at the moment failed states. But we could certainly see Islamic countries like Indonesia come on board. We could perhaps be lucky enough to see a lack of radicalization in Turkey, which is supposedly an ally, or if not an ally, we're not at war with Turkey despite the rhetoric from their president. Jordan's been a little concerning. I understand why, because they never really made a warm peace with us, and King Abdullah knows that his kingdom is really not so legitimate, and he's married to a Palestinian woman. And it's like I was using before the analogy with Syria. It's much easier to allow the Jordanian street to foster hatred toward Israel than it is to actually make peace with Israel. But I'm optimistic because the Abraham Accords was positive, remains positive, and for those who really want to see prosperity for themselves and the well-being in the Middle East, that's the way to go. I pray it will be.
Thanks, Brother Paul. Brother Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That was a very interesting presentation, and we're glad you could join us for a little bit on Sunday as well, this past Sunday. My question is related to personal context of mine. We had some neighbors that were Palestinian Christian. That's how they identified themselves. They have relatives, cousins in Judea and Samaria now. And about 6 months ago, when I was talking to one of the family members about how the family was doing in light of current, crises, obviously he pointed me out saying, well, the war in Gaza is not, a war here per se. But he said they were doing fine. And he said they enjoyed living there. They didn't have a problem. They were living in general peace. I'm wondering your perspective on that now. First, two-part question. One is, are the Palestinian Christians that are there in Judea and Samaria, are they kind of in the same category that you suggested before, because they're probably Arab and they're, you don't necessarily know, really what somebody's being threatened with behind the scenes, even if they're a really, genuine, nice person on the front side. So if you could maybe, answer a little bit about how the Palestinian Christians in Judea and Samaria are now kind of what their condition and attitudes appear to be? And then secondly, do you see opportunity there with some of the mission work that you were describing in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria as well?
So that's an excellent. The second part I'll take first. Definitely, I think that what's the phrase? Muslim background believers need to be an essential part of the solution for peace in Gaza. That can be Palestinian Arab Christians, it can be Syrian Christians, it can be others who are native Arab speakers but come from a Christian background, and it can be people who have converted from Islam in these countries. And I think that those are very critical. I want to just, before I talk about the specific nature of your question among Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria, I will say this, that I think that we, as the sovereign Jewish state of Israel, we have a responsibility first and before we're even talking about Palestinian Arab Christians who are not citizens. We have responsibility to the approximately 2% of our country who are Christian Israelis, most cases Christian Arabs. I have good friends who are Christian Arabs. It's unconscionable to me that Christian Arabs are persecuted in Israel. Yes, there are Jews who don't like and don't respect and will spit at Christians in the Armenian quarter of the old city, and other acts of vandalism and hate that take place. But the actual threats that take place against Christian Arabs in Israel are from Muslim Arabs. I know this. I know this factually firsthand from enough Israeli Arabs that I know that that's the case, and I believe that that's unconscionable, and that's something that we as Israelis need to fix as it relates to Palestinian Arab Christians. It's there hasn't been an uptick in violence in Judea and Samaria. Not appreciably. There's always terror. Every day there's someone throwing stones at cars somewhere. Every day there's a Molotov cocktail somewhere. The other day there was a car ramming and a shooting near Ariel, where my kids are in college. These are normal. I gotta, this is part of our normal existence. But I don't think we've seen an uptick, and that's a good thing. But the reality is, among Palestinian Arab Christians, if they want to be able to survive, they have to toe the party line among the Palestinian Authority, and we know that there's been a huge decrease in the Christian population. They fled. They're being forced out. That, unfortunately, we as Israelis don't have control over. And I will just add one personal anecdote. A few years ago, I mentioned my Run for Zion program. I decided to make coffee mugs. They're very cute, so that everyone who participates and donates would get a Run for Zion coffee mug. And I was thrilled to meet a Palestinian Christian in Bethlehem who made coffee mugs. And I thought, wow, how great. We're building bridges between Jews and Christians. Let me support this guy for 5 or 10 shekels it costs to get a mug, I don't remember, and give him some money. And I was really thrilled to do that. But because he lives in Bethlehem and is not Israeli, he couldn't come to Efrat. And because I'm Israeli and Jewish, there's no way, and you know what, that I was going to go into Bethlehem. So we met on the road, and it looked like an illicit drug deal, where we pulled our cars next to each other. He gave me a couple of boxes. I gave him an envelope in cash. And then what's the normal thing that someone says in the 21st century? I said to him, let's take a selfie. and his face tensed. He said, why? What do you want to do with that? And he really panicked. I said, I don't know. It's nice. I'm a Jew. You're a Christian. I'm helping you. You're helping me. He panicked. He said, I can't do that. And then his friend explained that if anyone were to see a picture with him and an Israeli Jew, much less a settler, that would be life-threatening to him.
My goodness.
Very, very thoughtful answer. Thank you very, very much. That was very much appreciated.
Richard and then Rebecca. Richard, go ahead.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for sharing with us tonight. My question is, what are some of the best scenarios for dealing with the indigenous population of Palestinians in Gaza? What do you were saying you'd like to see them change their whole attitude and of course, not teach mayhem and violence to kids, with their mother's milk.
Yeah.
What's the path forward that you see? Or that?
Did you all hear the question? What's the path forward with Palestinian Arabs in Gaza?
With the Palestinians in Gaza.
In Gaza. It's certainly not my place as an Orthodox Jew to talk about evangelizing Gaza, but I wouldn't mind waking up one day to find that there are 2 million pro-Israel Palestinian Arab Christians in Gaza who understand that Allah has failed them, and the God of Israel loves and has a covenant with the Jewish people, and if they want to be blessed, that's their best path. I do believe that just an exposure to that, short of actually converting, is really important. The other corollary that I haven't yet written is I think what's interesting, and I have to be fully transparent about it. The solution for peace in Gaza is talking about a change in heart. It does not have a diplomatic, political, geographic solution. I'm not going there. I'm talking about change of heart. But what I would like to see, and I've spoken to people about it, is what I'm calling a condominiumization of Gaza. You're leaning forward. That's intriguing, right? What's going to happen?
Yeah, what on earth?
What on earth? I would divide, if it were me, if Jonathan were in charge, I would divide up Gaza into 5 or 6 quadrants, more or less along the lines where the particular clans or strong clans are. And I would, maybe by randomly drawing straws or some other way to choose, I would give control over each of those 5 or 6 quadrants to an Arab state that has peace with Israel. So at the moment, the Saudis are ruled out. But I would allow the Jordanians to have a quadrant, and the Egyptians, and the Emiratis, and the Moroccans. Am I missing one? Not really Sudan, I don't think.
No.
But let's let the Saudis come in. Let's let someone else come in. Oh, Bahrain, of course.
Bahrain.
My mistake. Sorry, Bahrain. And I would let them build up what I saw in the United Arab Emirates, where they're competing to create the best emirate inside Gaza, the most prosperous, the most desirable, the most peaceful, the most affluent, the most beautiful, and let them compete to do that along with the changed hearts. And let people who are smarter in the room than me figure out the whole political solution.
I'll ask a follow-up, but
Okay.
when I can.
Well, and David Friedman has some good thoughts in his book. If you haven't read One Jewish State, it's a good read. Brother George, and also we lost Sister Rebecca. I don't know if she can come back, but and Jesse and George, we're going to let you ask your questions, and if they're short, Jonathan can answer. If not, I'm going to give Jonathan your email, and he will communicate with you by email. So, George, ask your question first, then Brother Jesse, ask your question after George. Go ahead, George.
In the Bible movement history, there is a feeling that events could trigger the desire for Jews worldwide to make Aliyah. Have you seen any of that?
What we're seeing is a good, very important question with the. I'm not sure we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, but we're seeing a much more active expression of anti-Semitism and threats to Jews in ways all around the world that I've never felt outside of Israel ever. And I'm afraid I wear a baseball hat when I'm traveling in America much more often than I ever did. That's certainly making Jews around the world more uncomfortable. And I believe even with the war that we're in the midst of is the same way there's a baby boom that's in the midst in Israel, and my youngest grandson is one of the evidences of that. Where I think we're going to be seeing in the next year and more an increase in Aliyah. I hope so.
Brother Jesse, go ahead.
So I think you touched on this in one of your previous answers, but obviously with this war, Israel's pushed into Gaza, into southern Lebanon, and now with Syria falling into the buffer zone beyond the Golan Heights. Do you see, I guess my question is kind of what's the day after? Do you see Israel relinquishing these lands that they've pushed into? Do you think they should keep the territory that they've occupied, so to speak? Or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a very good question, and it's very complicated because each of the three entities, Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria are at least independent states with independent borders. Gaza is an entity that for almost 2 decades has been ruled by a terrorist entity, and prior to that, a kinder and gentler terrorist entity that's been indoctrinated for the last 95 years by the ideology that was born with the Muslim Brotherhood. Um, I I can't say what will happen. Many things I'm not a prophet. I can say what makes sense to me is that for the indefinite future, Israel will and must have military control on all of the borders of Gaza. And for anyone who claims that Gaza was occupied before, now we'll actually see what that means because we really must maintain the borders and control for our own well-being, and I do believe for them, and I don't want to not emphasize that. As far as Lebanon, it's lovely that we have a provisional ceasefire. I pray that the Lebanese will take back their own country. I have a good friend when I lived in New Jersey. It was a guy named Sammy who worked at Costco, and we became good friends. And he fled Lebanon, a Christian. He fled Lebanon, and I keep saying to him, Sammy, you have to go back and take back your own country. It's not our job. We don't want to rule Lebanon. We tried that in 1982 for 2 decades. I think we will have to control a certain amount of territory and have freedom of operation, and probably to a certain extent in Syria as well. I think as miraculously shocking it was to wake up on Sunday morning and find there was no Assad regime. On another day, we wake up and find that Israel had taken out 80% of the military infrastructure of the previous Syrian army. We will have to maintain that and make sure that the Iranians can't keep supplying. But what will be? Wow. I love to have this conversation with you 50 years from now when we can unpack it.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank
Rebecca,
you.
you are
Rebecca's
back.
back.
After Rebecca's question, Brother Rick Sarasi, can you close with prayer after this question? I know we're over time. Thank you, Brother Rick. Go ahead, Rebecca. I don't know which Rebecca this might be. Oh, hi, Sister Rebecca. I don't know you that well.
Shalom from
Shalom, shalom.
from
Shalom,
India.
brother.
India. Nice
Jonathan,
to see
shalom.
you.
Shalom to you. Nice to see you.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
It's good to see you all. I just have not exactly a question, but I just want to share some of my experiences with one of the visitors from Israel. So a couple of years before, I happened to meet one of the Jews who visited India. And then I asked him, we were talking about Israel is a land of God, and whatever might you have, it's because God Jehovah. Like that, I was uh, telling him, and he just listened. Maybe you think, but we have our own intellectual powers to handle anything and everything. So, is that the attitude of people till now? About the war has any impact on the views of a common Jew? What do people think about a common person? I'm not talking about a Jew or any Christians over there, but in general, uh, how do people think about after witnessing these kinds of wars and how Israel can combat so confidently, and they come out successfully with God Almighty's help. So this is what we would like to know about. I'm Thelma and Kumar.
Thelma, okay.
Okay. Great question. Thank you for that. As I mentioned earlier, we're still living in the midst of the trauma from October 7th. It was not a war that we wanted, not a war that we planned for. It was a spectacular military and intelligence failure, political failure on many levels. That's a whole other conversation. But having said that, this goes back to my comment earlier in terms of faith and seeing and experiencing the war and me being afraid. I believe that most Israelis have experienced and are still experiencing trauma, and we will carry that in our social DNA for the rest of our lives. And I say most Israelis deliberately, including Israeli Arabs. Nevertheless, while I wish we didn't have to have the war to experience these, we are also seeing miracles. We're seeing people returning to faith, stronger observance. We were talking about this here earlier. More Jews doing more by way of observing Shabbat and other very important rituals and commandments. We're seeing a baby boom. My gosh, that's a miracle. Some of them refer to them as revenge babies. I don't like that term, but we're seeing a baby boom, and I actually can't wait to the end of the year to find out this year and then early next year, probably all of 25. We're going to see a big increase in the number of births. We're seeing God's hand in the miracles. It's not just, ooh, we survived that one. But there are many, many miracles, even among the suffering, even among the loss, even with the trauma that's in front of us. I guess the last thing I would say, it's tremendous hubris of me to sit here and talk about miracles when there are families of 100 hostages and the hostages themselves who are still in captivity. It's hubris because several hundred soldiers have been killed and they've left behind hundreds of widows, thousands of orphans, parents, siblings, grandparents, cousins, fiancés, friends. Thousands more soldiers have been injured seriously. And they will be physically and emotionally scarred for the rest of their lives. Yet I think many of them are seeing miracles. Last thing I'll share. I'm wearing a watch that has the paratrooper logo on the top. My oldest son, is a paratrooper. It's very emotional to talk about it. When he was called up on October 7th last year, we didn't know. It's a very unnerving thing as a parent to send your child off to war and not know where he is. And when he goes into Gaza or Lebanon, giving up his phone.
Right here.
I share this watch because it's actually something that we did as the Genesis 123 Foundation as a gift to his unit when they came out of Gaza last February. We made 85 watches to go to all the 85 men. By the way, one very cool thing, my son's unit is one of 2 in the whole IDF whose commanding officers are Christian. and one of one in the whole IDF, whose Christian commanding officer was born in Lebanon about 30 years ago. That's a different interesting story. On the back of the watch, you can't see the inscription. It's in memory of Gidon, the 36-year-old father of 6 who was killed by an RPG exactly a year ago. Exactly a year ago. My son was close by. And I mention this not for sympathy. I mention this because Gidon's widow, who, as soon as this is an amazing story, as soon as all the soldiers were given a reprieve to come out of Gaza that week, before they even could go get a shower, the army put them on 2 buses and brought them to Gidon's widow's home. Wow. To share their condolences. And she says that his death, as hard as it is and will be for their family, was a miracle, because had the RPG that killed him exploded in the way it was intended, it would have killed many more people. So even in the death and suffering, and the people who were most closely touched by it, we're seeing those miracles. And that, as you pray for Israel tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, pray that we continue to have that faith and see the miracles that are happening.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sister Thelma. Brother Rick, thank you for being here and praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Thanks, Rick. Go ahead.
All right, brethren and friends, let's bow our heads. Holy Father in heaven, we come before you very, very grateful for this opportunity to meet with Jonathan this evening. Father, it's with awe that we look at many of the things that he talked about, understanding and appreciating and loving the fact that Israel is your chosen people, and they have been for so many thousands of years. Father, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray for the individuals in Israel. We pray for the Jews who are worldwide, that they can begin to see and grasp and hold on to the fact that they are your people, that they can rejoice in that even through such a great, deep, and devastating tribulation and trial. Father, we thank you for Jonathan's courage to do the things that he does, for his desire to bring people together, Jews and Christians, to work hand in hand to not only fulfill your will, but to simply make the world a better place, to give the world a sense that this can be done, that there can be giving and reciprocation of that giving from both sides. We so deeply appreciate this. And Father, now as we part, we thank you for your plan. We thank you for the kingdom that is so, so close to being here. We thank you for the fact that the scriptures tell us that Jerusalem will be the capital of the world, and that the blessings that will flow through the new covenant will come through the nation of Israel first, and then flow out generously to every single people of the world. And that will be the reconciliation process that will bring all of us to eternity. Father, we thank you for this plan that you had from the very beginning, for the fact that Jesus was slain from before the foundations of the earth, and that you've given us an opportunity to see it, to embrace it, and to do the best that we can to walk step by step in our Master's footsteps. We again thank you for this beautiful meeting, and we pray again for the peace of Jerusalem and for all of those people, both Jew and Arab, who have suffered so much in all of these tumultuous events. We ask you to be with the hearts of all of the people, to touch the hearts where you see fit, so that they can see a better way. We again pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we ask all of these favors and blessings, not because we're worthy, but in the name of our dear Lord and Master and our Savior, the Redeemer of all mankind, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen, amen. Thank you all, brethren, for being here, and Jonathan especially. We have many more great conversations to have. We love you, brethren, Have a good night.
Brother Paul. Brother
Nice
Paul.
to see you,
Brother Paul.
Sister Alice.
Brother Paul.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Put Sister Joyce on the camera.
Oh,
I have to sing
come on,
happy
Joyce.
birthday to her. Get on
Joyce,
the
get
camera,
up there.
Sister Joyce.
Come on, birthday girl, sit down. Sit down over here. Don't you have to go that way? Okay, she's here. You can all talk to her.
No, I don't see her. Yeah, I gotta see her so I can sing happy birthday to her. First of all, I'd like to say to you, my sister, I love you so very much. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Joy. Happy birthday to you. May the good Lord bless you.
Thank you,
May the
Sister
good
Donna.